Okay, so I know I'm not there, and I know it's going to be difficult to do this because you can't ask me questions, but we're going to do our best, and you can ask me questions on Tuesday. So we're going to start off with some vocab that you need to know for cell transport. So if you can write these 3 words down, give a thumbs up when you're good. We'll pause the video, and when everybody's got their thumbs up, we'll talk about it. All right, so the first word, equilibrium. You should automatically think equilibrium, equal. That's exactly what it means. So on one side of the cell is the same amount of stuff, be it salt or sugar or hormones or water or steroids, whatever the substance is, there's the same amount on both sides of the cell. It's evenly distributed. Equilibrium, equal. A concentration gradient is the exact opposite. There's a difference in concentration. One half has a ton, the other half has not a lot. So a concentration gradient is not in equilibrium. And the last word, diffusion, that's how we go from having a concentration gradient to being in equilibrium. So how we go from having stuff more concentrated on one side than another, and how we even it out and get to equilibrium. And there are 2 kinds of movement in a cell. And so the first one we're going to talk about is passive transport. Before we do that, if you look at these pictures, you can probably figure out this stuff without even really getting any of the notes yet. So if you look at these boxes, okay, first, which one has the higher concentration of stuff? The blue dots are stuff. Okay, well, the box on the right has more blue dots. So the box on the right has a higher concentration. Meaning, at the bottom, what direction would stuff have to go to reach equilibrium? Where do I have to move the blue dots in order to reach equilibrium? And I think you can all easily tell that I'd have to move the blue dots from the right box over here to the left box. I'd have to move these over so I have the same amount of blue dots in both boxes. And that's exactly what diffusion is. And the first kind that we're going to talk about is called passive transport. There's a cartoon here. You're not going to understand it. We'll come back to it. So write this down, and then we're going to talk about it. All right. So passive transport. This is pretty basic. I'm just moving stuff from high to low concentration. This would be like if I shoved all of you guys in one corner of the room. You don't want to be shoved in the corner of the room. You want to be nice and spread out and not elbowing people and smelling them, whatever. So as soon as I let you go, you would automatically spread out. And that is passive transport. Now, there's 2 kinds of passive transport. Both of them are pretty easy. Both of them are moving from high concentration to low concentration. So spreading out, stuff spreading out, moving down their concentration gradient. The first one is called simple diffusion. So write this down. Give a thumbs up when you're good. Okay, so simple diffusion is just small, nonpolar molecules just wiggling right through the lipid bilayer. They're just going to wiggle right through. So like oxygen, carbon dioxide, different hormones like adrenaline or steroids, they're all nonpolar. So those lipid tails that are in the middle of the membrane, they're totally fine with these tiny molecules just wiggling on through. Some tiny molecules of salt can do this too. They just wiggle right in. If you eat a bowl of popcorn or salty chips or something, that salt is just going to wiggle right across those cell membranes to even out the concentrations. The other kind of passive transport is called facilitated diffusion. So we had simple, now we have facilitated. Write this down, including our 2 types of transport proteins. We'll talk about those. And give a thumbs up when you're good. Okay, so facilitated diffusion is just bigger molecules or polar molecules like water or some other larger things like carbohydrates, they're too big to just wiggle right through the cell membrane. So they need a little bit of help. And if you remember yesterday, we saw pictures of transport proteins hanging out in the cell membrane. These are just proteins that are going to protect those lipid tails so nothing polar touches them, because they hate polar things, and get stuff through the cell membrane that otherwise couldn't just wiggle right through. I'm still moving from high to low concentration. I just need a little bit of help. So there's actually two kinds of transport proteins we're going to talk about. The first one is super basic. It's called a channel protein. Write this down. Give a thumbs up when you're good. So a channel protein is just a hole, a pore, a tunnel. This is literally just a tunnel going right through the cell membrane. Okay? But you have to understand that it's specific to only one substance. Just like an enzyme can only fit one substrate, a channel protein can only fit one thing as well. So this example right here, okay, this is sodium, Na. It's only made for sodium, but it's just a tunnel. It's just a hole for this stuff to go right through the cell membrane without having to wiggle between these little lipid tails. It's too big to fit right here. So it needs this tunnel. So channel, tunnel. Channel protein, tunnel. The other kind of transport protein that you need to know is called a carrier protein. This one is a little bit trickier because it's not just a hole. It's a little fancier. So write this definition down. And you've got a couple things on the bottom to write, and then we'll talk about it. So a carrier protein is a protein that goes all the way through the cell membrane, but it's a little bit fancier. So if you look at this picture, something has to go and fit into the hole in the middle of the carrier protein, and then it kind of gets spit out to the other side. Okay, so one of these little ions, one of these little molecules is going to go and fit in, again, specific to one thing, and then this little Pac-Man looking carrier protein is going to go bleh and spit it out to the other side of the cell membrane. That's all it's going to do. Then it's going to open up to the other side again, get another little one, and go bleh and spit that out as well. So those are our two passive transports. Don't need any energy to do it. The stuff wants to spread out all by itself and go from a high concentration to a low concentration. Now, there is another way that we can do diffusion, and it's called active transport. And already, when you hear the word active, you should be thinking, uh-oh, something crazier is happening because it's active. So write this down. We're going to add a little something to this. But write this down. Give a thumbs up when you're good. So active transport requires energy. Active energy. Because I'm going to move stuff against their concentration gradient. This would be like if all of you were spread out in the room and I grabbed each one of you individually and shoved you all in the corner. It would take a lot of energy for me to shove you guys all in there. Or if you're packing, you're going on a trip somewhere and you're only allowed to bring a backpack. Okay, maybe you're going for a week somewhere and you can only have a backpack. Well, you want to get as much in that backpack as possible. So you're going to take stuff from all over your room or whatever and shove it in the backpack. So you're going from a low concentration to a high concentration, really trying to pack stuff in there. And it takes a lot of energy. And as soon as you see the word energy, you should automatically be thinking of that nucleic acid energy, ATP. I'm not very good at writing with this. I can't write with a mouse. You're probably already done writing ATP. All right, ATP. Woo! That's supposed to be like underlined, like yay, ATP. Okay. All right, so active transport requires a lot of ATP energy. Going from low to high, shoving stuff in where it doesn't want to go. And again, there's two kinds of active transport. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you. We will practice this. We will review it. I promise. We just had to get some of this stuff down, and I couldn't be there. So the first kind of active transport is called a pump, and it's exactly what it sounds like. So write this down. Oh, God. ATP is there still. Hold on. Let's erase this. Write this down. Give a thumbs up when you're good. I just want to get rid of ATP. I don't know why it came with us to this slide. Okay. All right. So write this down. Give a thumbs up when you're good. So a pump, if you think of like a bicycle pump or an air pump for a tube or something like that, you're pumping stuff into a place that already has a bunch in it. So if you're filling a tire, you're pumping more air into that tire. Or even if you've got a super soaker water gun, okay, and you've got to like pump it before it'll let you shoot, you're putting a lot of pressure inside of that water gun, and that's how the water is going to shoot out. So a pump is the same way. You're using one of those carrier proteins, same kind that we used before for passive transport, those little Pac-Man looking things that kind of took one of those molecules and spit it to the other side. Except this time we're spitting it to the side that already has a ton of stuff there. Okay, it requires ATP. Don't worry about how that works yet. We'll talk about that later. Okay, but it does require ATP. And it's just going to take one of those molecules and spit it where there's already a bunch of stuff. Just like packing that backpack full of clothing, you're shoving more in there. And it's the carrier protein that's going to do it. The other kind of active transport is a little bit different, but the word should look familiar because we already learned this word when we did cell organelles, and that is a vesicle. Whoops, too far. A vesicle. And I'm not going to try to write it again because it didn't work very well the first time. Up here, I want you to write what we wrote in our cell organelle packet. Vesicle, vehicle. Vesicle, vehicle. These are just things that are moving around. Vesicle, vehicle. Write that down and then write down the rest of this definition. Give a thumbs up when you're good. So with a vesicle, we're just taking membrane, parts of our cell membrane, and that's how we're going to use it. So if I've got a ton of molecules outside of my cell, part of my cell membrane is just going to form a bubble around that food or other molecules and suck them into the cell. Or if my cell makes cell poop, that bubble is just going to go to the surface and join with the cell membrane and spit it out. And I know that sounds kind of confusing, but this picture will help you understand it a little bit better. So if I look here, there's two different kinds of vesicles, but they do the same thing. So this one, I've got a bunch of molecules outside the cell. And all I'm doing is this membrane is going to kind of pinch in here. It's kind of sucked up and surrounded all these molecules. It's going to pinch itself off from the rest of that cell membrane. And look, now all those molecules are inside the cell. On the flip side, I could take molecules from inside the cell, go up to the cell membrane, join with it, and spit them all outside the cell. Either way, it takes energy, and I'm going to try to move stuff from a low concentration to a high concentration. This is how I can get like cell poop out of my cell and other larger molecules. A lot of times, this is how your white blood cells fight off infections. They basically eat them. If all of these little molecules were bacteria cells, your cell is trying to eat them and digest them and break them down so they can't hurt you. It's basically how that works. Right? That is where we're going to stop for today. I'm going to give you a worksheet. Well, I'm not going to give you a worksheet, but you're going to be given a worksheet to kind of practice these little vocab words and some of these ideas. And I will see you on Tuesday. Enjoy your long weekend.